talking about the history of the Mongol influence in Russia, and specifically in this paper, they talk about Moscow mostly. So let's read a couple bits from this and then check out some maps maybe. So it says here at the top, the Mongols ruled Russia for 240 years during the 13th to 15th century. So that's the 1200s to the 1400s. One of the greatest effects of Mongol rule in Russia was the rise of Moscow. See, this is important because if you look up the history of Moscow, it says that it was basically like a smaller city during this time period until the Mongols got here and made it actually expand. So if you think about what we've talked about in the past with like the cities of Genghis Khan and stuff like, or not Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan and stuff like that, like what was happening during the 13th century, it's pretty impressive that they're actually responsible for Moscow growing into kind of the city that it is today. We were reading Marco Polo before.
That's a very good point. And they always try to act like it was the Western influence that, civilized Russia and Siberia and built Moscow, but it's probably the exact opposite. And that the Tartars, like especially like Peking and like all the ancient mega cities of the East Asia there, that they brought it and built the like Moscow and all of the different like Dagestan, Chechnyas, all of the different Kremlins across the areas, that the same sort of palace technology or systems that were of the East.
I mean, they had a lot of walled fortress cities like that in the East, what you're talking about. And well, the interesting thing about the Mongols, though, is that it was split into different sections in this time period. So we'll check out a map of that actually real quick because it kind of shows it a little bit better than I can explain it. So you can see up here in the top left and on the northwest of the map, it says Kiev and Rus and the Grand Duchy of Moscow. So when you look up the Grand Duchy of Moscow, it doesn't necessarily make it easy to find this out, but they do admit it that they were a vassal state of the Mongolian Empire or the Tartarian Empire or the Yuan dynasty of China. It's all the same thing. So basically what happened is once the Mongols invaded Russia, they made Moscow like pay tribute to them. They had paid taxes and they had to send basically a princess.
It was a vassal state to them, and at that point acknowledging that their loyalty and allegiance and the power laid in the Far East, right, not in Europe or in Rome.
Well, that's the thing is like each vassal state of the Mongolian Empire, they would have like the ruler of whichever place send one of their daughters to be the wife of the Khan. So you see the same thing with the story of Prester John, why he ended up getting destroyed by Genghis Khan, because Genghis Khan requested a wife of his daughter, and he said he would rather burn his daughter than give her to Genghis Khan. So Genghis Khan went and destroyed the city of Tinduk, apparently. So let's get back to this article real quick in relation to the Grand Duchy of Moscow. So down here on the bottom right, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but we're going to, in a second here, it says here, although Russia was to remain subject to another 100 years of Mongol rule, it was often a name only. That's not the right section. I'm sorry. Okay. So right, this is what I'm looking for. In his will of 1389, Dmitry beneath Vladimir to his son, I bless my son Prince Vasily with all my patronage of the Grand Principality. And it says here, the Khan is no longer who chooses the Grand Prince. So basically what they're saying here is after 1389, the Khan is no longer who chooses the Prince of the Grand Duchy of Moscow. So before this, apparently, whoever was ruling in Moscow was because the Khan of the Mongolians decided that. So I just find that fascinating because they don't really talk about it, but we'll check out Wikipedia just to show you what I'm talking about here. It does admit it was a vassal state to the Golden Horde, but what they don't say is that the Golden Horde was basically part of a federation of the entire Mongolian or Tartarian Empire, right?
Exactly. Well, we're taught that there was nothing there, that it was just straight up uninhabited, like savages, right? That there was no organized civilization, really, when indeed it was the major power of the world, basically, or the old world.
Yeah, it was just a lot more advanced than what we say. For example, like in Marco Polo, the introduction to the Henry Yule version of Marco Polo kind of gives a lot of historical facts, and some people they say this is true, this is fake, but they admit in the introduction to the Henry Yule version that it's more than likely that the printing press was actually invented by the Tartars or the Yuan dynasty of China, and then Marco Polo brought back an example of this back to Venice with him, which led to the eventual invention of the printing press, which I find that shocking. And they also had taxes, like we were talking about before, paper money. They had vast canal systems. They had astrologers. They had a curfew system, actually, where I think it was I don't know what the time was, but every night they would they would have these horns or something that they would do at a certain time, and no one was allowed to leave their house. So it's a very, very organized society is the point I'm trying to make here. But let's get
and powerful that everyone had to be paying tribute to them and stuff, and that the Western society's narrative is that there was no great organized world societies or world trade, and that there was no idea of what was going on in the East or anything. But in the East, they're like, no, our civilization is thousands upon thousands of years old, and the only thing we really attribute to China or to the East, the Orient, and give to to China is the gunpowder of the fireworks and the cannons and rifles. But then it's like, obviously they would have been the ruling power with all of these technologies. And then also the Tartars and the Turks and the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish, which was the Tartars, and how they're all settled all throughout mid-Asia, Central Asia and whatnot, to East Asia. And that was one and the same of like the essentially trying to say that it was like this Muslim Asiatic power that was mixed with the Caucasians through Russia and that area.
See, the Muslim thing is, I do agree that the religion is
not necessarily Muslim, but some of the Islamic or Arabic style.
I think it's more the similarity is just that they believed in one God. It was just a Semitic style religion, because from the research I've been doing, it's more than likely that these people originated from the Levant, right? But
yeah, so, and when I say that, I mean more so the cultures of their language, the written language, their spoken language, and like their values, beliefs, and the technology, and that there's the acknowledgement of the golden age of alchemy of Arabia, and that is one and the same with this Tartar civilization, essentially, of them, and that they had these basic electrical understanding and stuff like that, and the esoteric knowledge that it was kept. And that's
where it gets even more interesting, though, because, like, for example, you have the Qin dynasty, who's basically what people say is the origin of the modern name for China, Qin, China, but they were the first ruling dynasty of China. And during that time period, they actually had, maybe I can find it during the stream and pull it up, but there was just technology that you would not believe. Like, for example, entire mechanical, like, orchestras that would apparently just vocalize like these.
Yeah, the automatons, like
and
analog robots and all of this stuff, right? Like,
they even had a pinhole type camera apparently back then, so they could look at the stars using a pinhole camera. So I'm not sure if they actually made photos with this or not, but
of course
the technology
they would
was there.
Because it's like the chemical alchem, and like their chemical understanding is the root of all of it, and the root of chemistry is electrical chemistry as well as biochem. But those are two rabbit holes that we currently have extremely classified and suppressed now, but the ancients also kept it that way, but had a vast, bigger, and better understanding of it than we do, especially with like energy and matter. And yeah, that's more for another day or later in the stream. But you're right, like the advancements of that technology and stuff, and yet we are told that there was nothing there and that there were these disorganized savages, but somehow this horde came and conquered all of the entire landmass of Eurasia a couple of times, but don't worry about that, and don't worry that all of the people speak the same languages throughout all of it, and like all of the advanced architecture seems to all be built from them as well, and the mega terraforming and all of that. Yeah, don't worry about any of that.
Yeah, it's really strange. It's really strange because that's where this whole Tartaria thing comes in, because some people say it's a psyop, where I think to a certain level it could be, but I'm not saying that the technology and stuff, or maybe the giants or all those aspects, I'm not saying that it's 100% fake. Obviously, it's impossible to tell, but what I am saying is when you look at the actual history of what is historically, according to mainstream history, the Tartars, it's just so astounding and unbelievable. The technology, the organization, everything about it. For example, this right here, the Xiongnu, they were the people who, during the foundation of China, I was saying earlier, you have the Qin dynasty, which was followed by the Han dynasty. So this Xiongnu were basically the Mongols of the Turkic peoples, who eventually would be called the Khans. So we're talking about the 3rd century BC here. These people are already organized into a federation, and they're already reaching from basically at one point Korea all the way over to Turkey, and even some people say into Ukraine. So this is
exactly
the same exact people being organized in the same exact way all the way back in the 3rd century BC, according to mainstream history. So that's where it leads to my next point here. So this is from Anatoly Fomenko's Volume 5, and this is basically him talking about how theoretically he's saying that the Romanov dynasty were usurpers who made it seem like the Mongols were foreign invaders, when in reality, just like I was showing you in that map a second ago, they've always been a federation of multi-ethnic people throughout history. So we're just going to read a little bit of this here. So we're on the bottom left here where it says 1. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but I'm just going to go ahead and read some of this. The Tartar and Mongol yoke was merely
when you highlight it, we can.
I don't think I can highlight it because it's on Library of Congress and they're very annoying.
Fair enough.
Yeah, see, I'm trying to highlight it. Nothing's happening. Sorry about that. So bottom left of the screen, if you want to read along, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. The Tartar and Mongol yoke was merely a period of military rule in Russia, which has never been conquered by any foreign force. The supreme ruler was the military leader known as the Khan or the Tsar. See, that's interesting because Tsar also means Caesar. We'll come back to that here in a second when we talk about the Ottoman Empire. Whereas the civilian rulers or the princes were in charge of the cities and provinces responsible for the collecting of tax. So once again, talking about tax collecting, that went to support the Russian army. We're going to the top here where it says 3. Ancient Russia can therefore be regarded as a unified state, the Great Mongolian Empire, which had a regular army of professional warriors, the Horde. There was also a civilian part with no regular army. See, this part right here is interesting to me because remember we were talking about the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians.
Local militias as well, it says. Like there was the Horde, and they have to call it the Horde, this horrible army, but no, that was their big policing army, essentially what America is today. And then it said the local civilian, which would be your militias or your police or your organized society, like law enforcement and National Guard, essentially.
To me, when it says there was a civilian part with no regular army, it reminds me when we were making that connection to the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians, they kind of had the same situation set up, right? So in the city of Carthage, they would never, ever, ever have any citizens of their city fight in the military. They had this basically, like, you could call it a federation, where they had their vassal states around were the only military that they had. So every time there was a war, the citizens of Carthage would never, ever go fight. And the Romans were also inspired by this at one point in history. So that's what I'm saying. It's strange how you have these same behaviors all throughout history from all these different civilizations that all appear to come from the Levant. So it's almost as if one family has been split, just kind of like what it says in the Bible, all around the world. So we're going to continue here at part 4. The Horde, or the militarized Russian Empire, existed between the 14th and the early 17th century. Its history with the notorious Great Strife, when the Russian czars of the Horde, the last one being Boris Godunov, were massacred in the course of the Civil War. The Horde, or the Imperial Army, was crushed by the opposition, or the pro-Western party. The throne was usurped by the radically new dynasty, the pro-Western Romanovs. So I'm sure many people know the Romanovs are definitely pro-Western because they're the same family as, for example, the royal family of the UK. I'm pretty sure that when the communists took over Russia, the Tsar actually sent a letter to his relative in the UK asking for help, which they didn't do because they all died. Apparently, obviously, we know that. All right, so this last section here, part 5, is really interesting as well. The new dynasty was in need of its new history, required as an ideological justification of its reign. After all, the Romanovs acted as usurpers insofar as the old history of Horde Russia was concerned. They needed to introduce a radically novel interpretation of the previous period in Russian history. One must admit that they managed to do it aptly enough. They distorted the entire history of Russia beyond recognition, keeping most of the actual facts intact. The history of the Horde of Russia, whose populace had been divided into civilians and professional warriors, the actual Horde, scrolling up to the top here, declared to have been the epoch of a foreign conquest. As a result, the Horde, or the Russian army, transformed into the host of foreign invaders from mysterious distant lands under the quills of Romanovian historians. So basically, he's just saying here that what we were looking at earlier, the Mongols or the Tartars were never foreign invaders. Ever since all of recorded history that we have, it seems like there's been a federation in place, or at least being worked towards. The reason that there's been civil wars throughout history where there was times where they weren't united in a federation is because the Mongols practiced something called partible inheritance. When the leader passes away, instead of having one person take over, it's usually split between relatives, or more specifically, his sons, right? And you saw the same thing in the beginning of France, which is why France oftentimes fell apart, because they also had partible inheritance. So it's once again, you just see this weird behavior over and over again. So one last thing I want to read here from this book before we move on. It's right in the middle here. I know you can't see my mouse. Okay, so it just says that the Horde Russia, it is similar to the terms Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and Russian Federation in the sense that its populace has always been multinational. The Slavs has always coexisted with other ethnic groups. So there you have it. I mean,
even as they do today with Chechnya, Dagestan, and the different Islamic societies in the southeast of the country, as well as I believe they still have a decently large Orthodox Jewish population, as well as their
the Jewish autonomous region, which is weird that they already had a Jewish state before Israel, but for some reason the Jews didn't want to go there. Have you ever heard of that region before? Let's look it up real quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Khazaria.
No, it's
right?
actually called the Jewish Autonomous Region. It's our Oblast.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Khazaria was part of the Soviet Union. What you're talking about is modern day Russia, and you're 100% correct.
So yeah, this existed before Israel. It was created as a safe haven for Jews, and now I guess there's barely any Jews living there.
They all went to Israel instead.
So 1928. Okay, so let's get back to another interesting connection between the Mongols. This is speculation, by the way, with this. None of this, I'm not saying any of this stuff is 100% true. This is all speculation. So when you look at this map again, you see something else that's suspicious in the Anatolian region. Down here, it says the Seljuks of Rum. Rum, when you look at what that actually means, it means Rome.
Rome, so right by Rome, no doubt.
Okay, so let's look this up real quick. The Sultanate of Rum. So this was another vassal state of the Mongolian Empire. What's interesting about this? This ended up becoming the Ottoman Empire, right? Another interesting thing about it is you see the double-headed eagle as their coat of arms, which is similar to the Holy Roman Empire and modern-day Russians' coat of arms and Constantinople, all that good stuff. So,
yeah,
I don't know. They try and make it seem like they're separate people, but if you read the story of the Seljuks who were in charge of this place, they actually came from Eastern Asia. They say they were running away from the Mongolians before they founded this place, but then they ended up serving underneath them, right? And if you look at the history of where these Turkic peoples came from, it's the same area that they claim that these people ran away from. So are they actually running, or were they just doing natural expansion? I'm not sure, but I did.
Or were they just always there, trading there, partly there the whole time too, right? Could have been like it says mixed societies and whatnot. That could they have been there and like coexisting as a mixed society, and then all of a sudden we get this Roman Empire.